for our next theory, I don't know how many of you have actually seen this. I don't know how many of you have actually been informed of this, but we now know where the war preface actually came from, where it's found inside the Shadowlands. And Wowhead did a wonderful job of actually finding, in the Ashbringer comics, finding something that might be linking to all of this. And there's a lot that this teaches us, as well as the Bastion Afterlives cinematic, plus the Autumnwheel cinematic, I believe teaches us about the origins of the Shadowlands and also why the Jailer was ultimately banished. Remember, we've done multiple videos now on the Jailer. We've discussed the Jailer's plans, what he might be doing, why he might be doing things. But the one question we've always had that we could never truly answer is why? Why was the Jailer banished? And we've tried to argue every other way to try and extrapolate the truth from what little we know, because this again is a portion of brand new lore for us. But I think I finally know why he was banished. So, in the comics, right, Balnazar says the following: "My kind are called Nathrazim, Dreadlords in your tongue. Perhaps Thalkitun would be more fitting. It means unseen guest in our language." I want you to focus only on that. Unseen guest. In other words, you invite them in and they remain unseen. Basically what this means is the Nathrazim, as we know already, are shrouded in mystery. No matter where they are, their true intentions are never quite known. However, thanks to Enemy Infiltration, and I believe that this is canonically true, this is canonically what the Nathrazim wants to do, we now know their major plan. We know what they set out to do, what their reasons for existence is. The reason the Nathrazim exist, the reason they infiltrate every single cosmological force, is to start a war. A war between the cosmos, between the cosmological forces of the universe. Now remember, I started off this conversation asking you what the Jailer wants, why the Jailer is doing what he's doing. Now there's a wonderful concept in in psychology also, but philosophy more so. There's a wonderful concept that suggests you are what you do. Now, this might sound on the surface rather silly and stupid, but basically what this concept is, or what this concept means, is that don't judge someone on what they say, what they pretend to be, what they act to be. Judge them on what they do. This have actually also become very important in technology. A machine is what it does. So if you don't know what a machine was actually designed to do, look at what it does. Because if you can see what it does, then it doesn't matter what its original intent was. That machine is doing what it's doing, and therefore it is what it does. And the same is true for humans. You get humans that say terrible, horrible things, but what they do isn't bad. Therefore we say, well, you might say stupid shit, but you do good stuff. Therefore you are, by extrapolation, a good person. So looking at the Jailer, knowing very little about who the Jailer is, the only thing we can do is look at what he does. What is it that he does? Now, of course, we don't know what he does. That's the big problem here. Because the Jailer was introduced to us for a few seconds when we entered the mall for the very first time. After that, we heard him say a single sentence and nothing else. But we do have his followers to go by. We can look at what his followers do and try to figure out what he does. Because it stands to reason that his followers would do the things that he wants them to do, because he himself is incapable of doing those things. So looking at the Nathrazim, their main function, their main goal is to cause an uprise within the cosmological universe. And they say it here. They speak of every single one of the cosmological forces and how they infiltrate the cosmological force and then they disrupt it. Now, for Order, they managed to do this with Sargeras. They managed to convince Sargeras that the Void Lords is such a giant threat that they must be stopped. Now, this is where I finally saw the light, if you will, about who the Jailer is and what he ultimately wants. Because what was Sargeras' next step? He arrived at the belief that all life in the Great Beyond must be cleansed. Now, who benefits when all life in the Great Beyond dies? The SL, the Shadowlands, because all anima must go there. But is that enough? Is it enough to just say, well, the Jailer was greedy, he just wanted the souls? Well, this is where the problem comes in. We have two conflicting reports. We have the Primus that tells us that the Jailer betrayed them, and for his betrayal he was banished. For his treachery he was banished. We have the Jailer claiming that in fact he is the one that was betrayed. He is the one that was betrayed. And that for that betrayal, they will all pay. So who do we believe here? Now, we could argue that, hey, Akalon, all villains claim that they've been betrayed. But in my opinion, that would be too easy. I don't like taking the easy route out. I like to go deeper and say, all right, what could potentially have happened? Now, I have argued in the past and I have gone in great lengths, or to great lengths, to try and explain why I believe the Void is not a natural entity that was created. I believe the Void is far more dangerous than any of the other cosmological forces, and I actually base this on how, among others, so there's actually more, but you'd have to watch those videos because if I do that, this entire discussion is going to be 2 hours long. If we just look at how Xal'atath speaks about Elune, Elune, whom we have theorized, is a first one, in other words, more powerful than any of the Eternal Ones or the Titans ever could imagine. If we look at how Xal'atath speaks about Elune, it is with discontent, not even with respect. Xal'atath doesn't give a fuck. The Void Lords do not care. Elune to them is of no consequence. They don't view her as being a threat. Even though she is powerful and she most likely created much of what we see in the world, not for the Void. They don't give a shit. I have theorized in the past and we have tried to explain what lies at the heart of Torghast, but really what convinced me was a line from within the Enemy Infiltration, Preface to War. The Void would be one of the hardest to infiltrate because they see 1,000 truths. Now, if you wanted to, at least based on the most recent speculations we've done, everyone seems to be in agreement that Torghast might house something rather ancient and evil. I don't know if any of you disagree with that, you can let me know if you think so, but Torghast seems too complex a prison to simply be a place where they house unwanted souls. The prison itself is simply too complex. So what exactly is Torghast built for? What does Torghast do on a gameplay level? It consistently changes. So here's my question. If you needed to lock up a being that sees 1,000 truths, you'd need a prison that has 1,000 hallways that leads to nowhere. In other words, the prison, the way out of the prison should be so complex that even a being that sees 1,000 different truths would not find its way out of that prison. I believe the very first interaction, because here's the thing, if you look at the Eternal Ones, they seem very disinterested with things that happen outside of the Shadowlands. All of the Eternal Ones is effectively stuck inside the Shadowlands, and their minds are just here. They don't give a fuck about anything outside. I believe the very first time that the first ones, or the Eternal Ones of the Shadowlands, met something on the outside, it was a Void Lord. A Void Lord attacked. Why would the Void Lord attack? Anima. We already know the tremendous power that Anima has. We already know just how valuable a resource it is. Every single cosmological force in the universe would want it. This Void Lord stumbles into the Shadowlands, and it nearly destroys it. And for those of you, I know from a recent video, people had comments about how do we know the Void attacked. You're going to see it in the first 2 minutes of Maldraxxus. When you go to Maldraxxus, one of the very first quests you do gives you a giant thing of how many thousands of Necrolords died trying to stave off the Void Lord. Right, so we have canonical evidence that a Void Lord did attack the Shadowlands at one point or another, right? The first time they meet one of the forces that isn't native to the Shadowlands, it is a Void Lord, and this thing nearly destroys the Shadowlands. And so Zovaal comes up with a plan. Now remember, what I'm trying to describe here is how two conflicting accounts, one saying that he betrayed them and another saying that they betrayed him, can be real. So keep that in mind as I go through this. Zovaal, I believe, currently, or at the time, was the leader of the Shadowlands. He was the leader of the Pantheon of Death. Being attacked by the Void Lord, they realized that there was a problem. There was a giant problem. As long as the other cosmological forces exist, the Shadowlands is vulnerable. The Shadowlands can and will be attacked. Now, most of you should know this already, but I'll just quickly do a recap. I don't believe, and as I've already explained in the previous discussion that we had, I do not believe that the Shadowlands as it exists today is the natural creation of the universe or of how the Shadowlands were meant to be. The Maw was the first area where souls actually entered into the Shadowlands before the construction of Oribos. When I look at the soul stream that flows from the top of Oribos out the bottom, it just makes sense to me. Why? Because here's the thing, we are told that now that the Arbiter is offline, the souls go to the Shadowlands, but it seems to be natural, because if the Arbiter was the one who brought stability and order to the system, then her removal or her offline nature would have meant that souls would just go fucking everywhere. Instead, you see a beautiful soul stream enter at the top of Oribos, right out the bottom, and form a beautiful line all the way into the Maw. Not only that, but you see every single one of the zones feeding into the Maw. The Maw quite literally is like a black hole absorbing everything within the Shadowlands at the moment. So these souls, in my opinion, used to go into the Maw quite literally the mouth of the river, where the river of the Shadowlands, the river of death, starts. This is where souls would enter. But the Pantheon of Death came up with a plan. They realized that they are vulnerable. That as long as they stand... Now, this is how I think it happened. I believe the Maw was the original place, and the Maw, if you look at the Maw, has this giant structures all over it that almost reminds you of a city in disrepair. I believe that this was the city of the dead, and that the council of the Pantheon of Death sat in the mall. They served in that city. But they had to devise a new plan. Now that they were attacked by a Void Lord, this Void Lord nearly destroyed their world. They had to come up with a new plan. So their first order of business was to render the maw inescapable. They destroyed the relic of the first one, ensuring that even if a Void Lord can make its way out of Torghast, it would still not be able to get to the rest of the Shadowlands. It would still be linked forever to the maw. Can't escape there. It will be trapped there forever. So basically a prison within a prison. And then they devised a new plan. This new plan was rather simple. They needed to beef up the protection of the Shadowlands. And so the different covenants were created. And we already know that there's more covenants to come, just FYI. These are not the only covenants, or at least these are not the only zones that we're going to meet in the Shadowlands or that we're going to visit in the Shadowlands. There is more to come. But I believe that they started building an army that would be strong enough to ensure that none of these other cosmological forces could get at it. Except Zovaal and Denathrius wanted to go further. You see, they couldn't convince the other Eternal Ones, who is extremely narrow-minded, because they really are just like the normal Titans of Order. They only care about their little world and nothing else matters. They struggled to convince them that, hey, the true answer is going out there and fucking destroying these other cosmological forces. They wouldn't hear it. Much like Sargeras tried to do with the Pantheon of Order. And so the jailer and Denathrius comes up with a plan. One that happens behind the backs of the other cosmology, or of the other Pantheons of Death, or Titans of Death. They will use the Nathrazim. Through using the Nathrazim, they will start an artificial war within the cosmos. One that would force the Pantheon of Death into action. So their goals were noble. They did identify a serious problem within the universe. The void will consume all things, the light wants to control all things. Every single one of the cosmological forces seems hell-bent on destroying everything else, except, of course, for two of them. Order and Death seems to be very relaxed. Like, the only time the Titans really interfere with anything is if it upsets the Order. But the Titans don't really declare full-out war against any of the cosmological forces. They just chill on the Pantheon and don't want anyone to disrupt their order. Which is what the Nathrazim actually say here, right? The Titans will be the easiest because they're so fixated on order that, you know, as long as you don't threaten that, they really don't know what the fucking truth is. But Zovaal and Denathrius needs these forces to attack, to spur the other Titans into action. Unfortunately, they overplay their hand. They overplay their hand. When Sargeras starts destroying the planets and all life in the Great Beyond, this is when the Pantheon of Death realize something is wrong. Zovaal is going to use all the anima of the Great Beyond to fuel his army, to build the greatest army that has ever existed, an army that none of the cosmological forces could stand against. And they decide he needs to be overthrown. He needs to be replaced. In my opinion, this action, this story, is the only way that both Zovaal and the other Pantheon, or the rest of the Pantheon Titans of Death, can actually both agree that they've been betrayed by the other. Because Zovaal truly wasn't doing anything to fuck them over. He was trying to strengthen them. They viewed it as a betrayal because it goes against everything that they believe they should stand for. But it doesn't end there, of course. What kind of speculator would I be if that was the whole theory? This is where the Titans of Death realized one fundamental flaw. As long as they keep tabs on the world of the living, there's always going to be problems. There's always going to be fundamental problems that leads them into action. That means that they don't just do their jobs, and their jobs is to care for the souls of the Shadowlands, of the mortals that die, but they're always going to be spurred into action even further. And it really is in the Uther Afterlife cinematic, or the Bastion Afterlife cinematic, that we see Devos for the first time start questioning the purpose, the very thing that is meant to order the Shadowlands. But really, where I started asking questions is with Mograin's Fatebringer. Now, I'm not going to go into the whole story here. You can do it. I'll probably have a link for you if that's what you need to see. You can go into the story. Most of you should know the story already because it does cover a lot of the first Ashbringer, the corrupted Ashbringer, and now Fatebringer, and how these weapons in some way has a connection, at least in how it's meant to function, right? How it's meant to function, at least. Now, there's one very interesting thing about Mograin Fatebringer, the Origin Sword story. There's a point where Alexandros questions why he was placed in Maldraxxus when a paladin would have been far better suited to the Kyrians. They tell him there that the Arbiter did not view his memories as a burden. That's why he was placed in Maldraxxus. The Arbiter did not think that his memories would keep him from being able to do his job. So in other words, we get some kind of indication of what the Arbiter does with the souls as she judges them. She doesn't just decide based on your doings in life, but based on your actions in life. She also looks at your memories and asks, will your memories put the Shadowlands at risk? If your memories will keep you from actually being able to do your job, that is a problem, and you will overthrow the order of the Shadowlands, and they can't have that. What did Uther say right at the beginning of the cinematic?
Uther.
Where am I?
Welcome to Bastion. You led a truly selfless life, and for that, you have been chosen.
Chosen?
To shed your mortal burdens and join the ranks of the Ascended, serving to ferry the souls of the dead unto the Shadowlands.
I serve the light, and my work is not done.
I serve the light, and my work is not done. In other words, Uther's memories would have been a problem within the Shadowlands. He could not be sent to Maldraxxus because in Maldraxxus, he would still serve the light, and this is the one thing that the Arbiter does not require. The Shadowlands does not need you to avenge yourself. The Shadowlands does not allow for interference within mortal realms. If Uther's memories are not wiped, Uther will want to interfere, and this is the problem. This is where Devos, for the first time, realizes that something is very, very fucking wrong.
Mortal life.
How can I forget when I can still feel his blade?
Your soul is wounded? Who did this to you?
He was my student. He betrayed us all.
Show me.
Devos realizes that the purpose is flawed. The idea that the Shadowlands is not meant to interfere with mortal lives is a lie. The very idea that they are meant to serve and only serve at the leisure of the Eternal Ones is a lie. Now remember, during this entire cinematic, Devos is warning them against the jailer, but Devos tells us in the Kyrian campaign that as she listened to the words of the jailer, she started to understand how they were betrayed, how he was betrayed. This was only the first step. As she realized that the purpose itself was flawed, she started to question the very nature of things. The very idea that the jailer himself may actually be wrong was now at question. And once that happened, she saw the truth of what the jailer had been saying all along, why the jailer had been warning them against all of this. So do you guys see why I believe that the Shadowlands is not natural? That we are not meant to live in the Shadowlands? All of this was built to ensure that the anima would always be supplied for power and to defend the Shadowlands. But in doing so, we become servants. We become slaves. And there's something rather interesting that I think a lot of people don't necessarily make a link with. The newest music from World of Warcraft is actually called Sylvanas Free Will. Now you could say, dude, they were just choosing a cool line. That's not really a cool line though. It's not really a cool name for music. Sylvanas Free Will. I've said before, this is what Sylvanas is after. I still believe that this is what Sylvanas is after. She wants freedom. Freedom from the forces that wish to control us. Freedom from the forces who wish to tell us what to do. But now, and I don't know if you guys are, I don't even know if I'm ready to say this, but I might be questioning my own theory about Sylvanas. Thanks to this. What if the Nathrazim, because according to this, the Nathrazim will corrupt anyone foolish enough to invite them in. Now we know that Varimathras was very close at one point in time with Sylvanas. So one or two things could be happening here. Option number one is that Sylvanas is looking for something that's been planted inside of her. She thinks what she wants is free will, when really she is acting at the behest of the jailer. Or she figured it out. Because remember, Sylvanas never truly trusted Varimathras, or the Dreadlords for that matter. If you play the stories and you read the lore, Sylvanas always had her doubts about the Dreadlords. She never truly submitted to them, or at least trusted them. What if through this, Sylvana saw what they were actually up to. What they're actually trying to do. And in some kind of roundabout way, she is putting a stop to it once and for all. But she understands, of course, that she can't do it from the outside. There's no way of defeating the jailer while you're sitting on Azeroth. There's no way of defeating the Shadowlands while you're sitting on the outside. You have to be on the inside. You have to play your part. Now again, I'm not saying that is my theory. I'm saying this is one of two theories that it could be. So I'm not once again telling you guys that hashtag Sylvanas did nothing wrong. I'm simply saying there's a chance that the opening chapters of Before the Storm wasn't just talking about Before the Storm. Remember what Sylvana says to Nathanos in the opening chapters as they're walking through the streets of Orgrimmar in Before the Storm. She tells him that she misses the shadows, that she'd much rather be back in Undercity. She doesn't like all these eyes on her. Sylvanas has always preferred to act in the background, to do things away from prying eyes. So could we perhaps still see another side of Sylvanas in some way? Could we see by the end of the Shadowlands that Sylvanas herself used her new position within the Jailer's army to gain enough power to defeat him? Or could this be simply a play for something bigger? Simply a play for something more grandiose? Personally, I don't mind really, because I'm okay with either. I'm okay with Sylvanas destroying the whole world and everything in it, and I've been very happy to help. If there was a Maw Covenant to join, I would be part of the Maw Covenant, and this is the one covenant that I can absolutely say it doesn't matter what their power level is, I would still join that fucking covenant on all of my classes. I would not see any of the other stories within the Shadowlands. I would just see the Covenant story, the Maw Covenant story, because that's the covenant that I would fucking join. So if they want to destroy the world, at least hopefully I get the choice to do so. If they don't, I'm happy with that as well, as long as it leads to the salvation of Sylvanas. It's pretty much the only thing I give a fuck about. I do not want Sylvanas to die. She's one of my favorite characters in the game. She's one of those characters that I think if she was removed from the game would be just miserable and horrible, and it's not something I want to think about. Also, she's sexy, so why the fuck wouldn't you want her alive? Yeah, that's pretty much it. So, what do you guys think of this theory? Yes, no, maybe, hit, miss? Where do you guys fall on this?